Let's take a look at the most interesting stories for this week's compilation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your favorite story you like. If you're bored, you want something in the background, or you're looking to hear about stranger teas, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notification button so next time you can't sleep, you know where to go. Leave the timestamps of the videos that you want to recommend to others in the comments section. Service members, what is your worst military wife story? Story 1. I have two. First, I was the witness to one of my soldiers' weddings. It was a typical Joe wedding in that it took place midday at a Wings and Things during the lucky bride's lunch break. The mother of the bride said Wings and Things, but refused to attend the ceremony despite being at work that day. It was pretty amazing. Second, I was at officer candidate school with an Army hot blonde. She was deployed on September 10th, and everybody hit on her. She was drowning in attention. But it was all for naught because she was married to a Green Beret or something. Well, all that attention finally got to her head, and she started sleeping with the cadets. It got to the point of her and another married female getting nailed in a hotel room at the same time, and they reportedly high-fived mid-coitus. About 3/4 of the way through the course, she started to put on a little weight, and it sure seemed like her belly was growing faster than the rest of her. About 4 weeks before graduation, it came out that she was, in fact, pregnant, with who the F knows baby. Not long after graduation, I heard that her marriage to Mr. SF did not survive the encounter. My brother-in-law was on both sides of poopy cheating stories. He married a woman he chatted to online for a few weeks when he was 19, then he had to go to Iraq. A month after he left, she told him that he got her pregnant. He comes home after 6 months, then she has the baby. The baby definitely is not his. Fast forward 10 years, he's married to an awesome chick we all like. She works a job and takes care of everything around the house. He cheats on her with an 18-year-old girl that worked at Sonic. She catches him and leaves for a weekend to go stay with her sister to figure out what to do. He puts all her stuff in cardboard boxes out under the carport and moves in the new girl. Story 2. Air Force and Navy veteran here, and I'm a Marine wife. The worst thing I ever experienced was the death of a beautiful 5-month-old baby girl. The sergeant and his wife were serious gamers. The wife also suffered from mental health issues. Both were weird and ignorant. The wife was tired of the baby crying and not sleeping, so she propped a bottle on a pillow, used more pillows to cushion her, and left her in the master bedroom while she and the hubby gamed. The little girl suffocated. Neither parent checked on her for 12+ hours. They said they thought she was sleeping. They found her unalive, left her for several more hours, and made a failed attempt to resuscitate her while they were on the phone with 911. They're so stupid. The police and EMS shared with me that rigor mortis had already set in, and it looked as if the baby had been unalive for more than 24 hours. The parents went back to gaming because they wanted to finish their match or whatever. The mother showed zero remorse. However, she was completely fascinated with how popular she was becoming on social media. So much so that she was super giddy with her local fame and said her kid's life ending was worth the fame and GoFundMe. The Marine was indifferent to the whole thing. This was one of my husband's Marines. We got the call to go to the family and bring them whatever they needed for temporary lodging. We had no idea what a poop show we'd be walking into. Story 3. Our neighbors, too, brought us some stories. 1. Unit deployed and she met a new guy, used power of attorney to divorce the husband overseas, and married the new guy so quickly she was able to stay on base in the same house. First husband came home and ended up being in the same platoon as the second husband, who now lived in his house with his kids and all his belongings. 2. When we first moved in on base, we had a neighbor that was super friendly. Wife told us she had cancer, so her brother was staying with her to take care of her. We think nothing of it. A few months later, they moved out to live off base. Normal thing, so no reason to be skeptical. Fast forward a few months, and I'm shoveling the driveway, and a guy from next door comes over to say hi. I say hi and welcome him as the new neighbor. He's not a new neighbor. He had that house for a couple years. I got confused and asked about the woman who had moved out recently. He told me that woman was his wife. The brother was her lover. She didn't have cancer, and she spent all his money on Farmville, then moved out with everything they owned. Story 4. A guy in my shop, Air Force, deployed to Iraq for 4.5 months. Before he left, he signed over general power of attorney to his wife. While he was gone, she started effing another guy in our shop, then signed the divorce paperwork as his power of attorney and his rights to see his kids, as well as draining his bank account. She went to live with the other guy in my shop and his friend off base. They were both arrested for check fraud when trying to pass off a check that was the roommates in the shopette on base. The guy she divorced eventually got full custody of the kids, and the other guy in my shop got kicked out of the Air Force. There were other stories of cheating and all that kind of stuff, but this one takes the cake. She actively worked to ruin his life when all he did was love his kids and get deployed to Iraq. Don't give anyone general power of attorney ever. I don't care how much you trust them or how much you think they love you, don't do it. You can give them specialized power of attorney that only allows them to handle your affairs that you very specifically need them to handle. Story 5. I got accosted by a dependa at a Home Depot parking lot because I parked in her space. I parked in a veteran spot at Home Depot. I am a veteran. I had my 2 toddlers with me, and the spot was next to a cart stall. As I'm pulling my kids out of the car, this lady walks up to me and starts asking me questions. Simple stuff, but nothing out of the ordinary, but I leave my kids in the car to be safe. She then starts asking about my veteran status, which was weird, but not bad. I told her I'm a sergeant in the 123 Trans Brigade, not real, part of the Natty Guard. Well, my husband's a lieutenant colonel, which means he's a higher rank, she said. Well, if he's a commissioned officer, he's already a higher rank, I said. So you should give me your spot. I was dumbfounded. What the F? I told her to pound sand, to which she wanted my info, rank, name, etc. So I said, yeah, sure, and I'll make sure to give you the spot next time. No crap, 3 days later, I get a call from my NCOIC. Hey, Sergeant stuck on post, do you know about LTC Buttface? Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 6. Posting on behalf of my husband. Worst, they came back from a 15-month tour in Iraq. His platoon sergeant went home to find another man living in his house with his wife and kids. His kids, toddlers, were calling the guy daddy. When he walked in, his wife basically said, yeah, I want a divorce. I'm with him now. Worst part was the platoon sergeant and new daddy kinda worked together, but was one of the few who stayed behind for clerical stuff while the rest deployed. Yes, I know this is absolutely against the rules. This was when stuff was the Wild West, and a DUI was an unofficial requirement for E6 ETA. I asked my husband what happened after this. He doesn't know what happened to Jody, aka Deployment Replacement Daddy. The husband threatened to take the kids and kick her onto the street, which he definitely had grounds to do. Instead, she agreed to on-demand banging and threesomes, including summoning an escort if he wanted one and help him keep it on the down low. Story 7. Oh, I'm going to post some of my friend's highlights. She was the midwife on an Air Force base, delivered lots of babies. The colonel brought his 16-year-old daughter in because she was pregnant. Turns out the father was a new junior enlisted. He did not last long in the military. Dude's wife left him and moved in with her boyfriend off base while he was deployed. She got knocked up. Since they were still married, she was still going to the base for medical care. Their divorce wasn't final by her due date, so she still got to go to the base and deliver. Her soon-to-be ex-husband, the military guy, had his buddies in security forces put a security flag on his soon-to-be ex-wife's boyfriend. The boyfriend couldn't be on base for the birth of his child. And always the favorite, babies coming out with the wrong ethnic background of the father was at least a once-a-year thing. Story 8. Dude in my platoon's wife falsely accused her ex-MP boyfriend of grape. Went as far as stabbing a mattress and swallowing a condom to set him up. Dude spends weeks in jail before being cleared of all charges. When it comes to light, it was crazy lady vindictive bullcrap. She amped up the crazy. She handed her friend and my platoon mate's baby through a window at night while they watched a movie. Platoon mate went to check on the baby, and it was missing. Prompted the first Amber Alert in Alaska history. She tried to pin it on the MP as some sort of act of vengeance. I can only imagine what the poor dude was thinking when the cops came to him with this. He was very quickly eliminated as a subject, and they figured out that the baby was safe rather quickly. Story 9. One evening while I was on staff duty, my then-wife decided that I was cheating on her and not, in fact, at work. I was totally at work, nor had I ever cheated on her. So she texts me and says, I'm going to go to the barracks and F the first soldier I see. I was so checked out of the relationship at this point, I was just waiting to get out to leave her, so I didn't bother responding. She showed up at the barracks and got turned away by CQ because she used her dependent ID to try to check into the barracks and couldn't tell them who she was there to visit. Story 10. I am a military spouse, but worked as a DoD employee with the Marines. Got a call that a military spouse was in the hospital. Her place on base housing had gotten broken into. The 9-month pregnant spouse was raped and beaten and taken by ambulance to the hospital. The assault caused a miscarriage. I was devastated and went to the hospital with several officers in the Marines' chain of command. One of the nurses tending her looked me in the eye and said, "I'm very interested in how this is going to play out." I was so confused. Story 11. While delivering our 4th baby at a military hospital, we were talking to one of the nurses about infidelity and crazy things she had witnessed. She told us about a woman coming in with her husband for a C-section that was not scheduled. The woman insisted that she was scheduled for a C-section that day. They did an ultrasound and found that she was 3 months pregnant, not 9 months pregnant. She was willing to deliver a baby 6 months early so it would appear the conception lined up with her husband's mid-tour leave. Story 12. Oh man, so many. One friend in the Corps, a first-term sergeant who hated every minute he was in uniform. He re-enlisted so she could go to school, left for deployment after re-enlistment, came back to a divorce and a drained bank account. Had another sergeant who met his wife while he and 7 other guys were running a gangbang on her. He decided he needed to marry her. So many poop stories there, but he probably deserved them, Story 13. The 9-month pregnant rape and assault victim was given an ultrasound and blood work performed upon being admitted to the hospital. She hadn't been pregnant, she wasn't raped, her due date was the next day, and she's been faking the pregnancy the whole time. She beat herself up and carved herself up with a knife, then made up the rape story, resulting in a miscarriage, as a way to cover up the 9 months of lying to her husband about being pregnant. Historians, what's the funniest/most ridiculous story from history that you know of? Story 1. Taken from the wiki page, which has information from the Russian Primary Chronicle, the following account is taken from the Primary Chronicle. Princess Olga was the wife of Igor of Kiev, who was killed by the Drevlians. At the time of her husband's death, their son Sviatoslav was 3 years old, making Olga the official ruler of Kievan Rus until he reached adulthood. The Drevlians wanted Olga to marry their prince Mal, making him the ruler of Kievan Rus, but Olga was determined to remain in power and preserve it for her son. The Drevlians sent 20 of their best men to persuade Olga to marry their prince Mal and give up her rule of Kievan Rus. She had them buried alive. Then she sent word to Prince Mal that she accepted the proposal, but required their most distinguished men to accompany her on the journey in order for her people to accept the offer of marriage. The Drevlians sent the best men who governed their land. Upon their arrival, she offered them a warm welcome and an invitation to clean up after the long journey in a bathhouse. After they entered, she locked the doors and set fire to the building, burning them alive. With the best and wisest men out of the way, she planned to destroy the remaining Drevlians. She invited them to a funeral feast so she could mourn over her husband's grave. Her servants waited on them, and after the Drevlians were drunk, Olga's soldiers killed over 5,000 of them. She then placed the city under siege. She asked for 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. She claimed she did not want to burden the villagers any further after the siege. They were happy to comply with the request. Now Olga gave to each soldier in her army a pigeon or a sparrow and ordered them to attach by thread to each bird a piece of sulfur bound with small pieces of cloth. When night fell, Olga bade her soldiers release the pigeons and the sparrows. So the birds flew to their nests, the pigeons to the cotes, and the sparrows under the eaves. The dovecotes, the coops, the porches, and the haymows were set on fire. There was not a house that was not consumed, and it was impossible to extinguish the flames because all the houses caught on fire at once. The people fled from the city, and Olga ordered her soldiers to catch them. Thus she took the city and burned it, and captured the elders of the city. Some of the other captives she killed, while some she gave as slaves to her followers. The remnants she left to pay the tribute burned down a whole city with birds. I'd say that's pretty ridiculous. Story 2. Not a historian, so I may get some things wrong, but I like the poop show that was the German walled city of Münster during the Reformation. Basically, Münster was one of the last few German cities holding out from becoming Lutheran, until a Protestant revolt took place and kicked out the bishop and all of the Catholics, who promptly took almost all of the money in the city with them, as they occupied the higher levels of society. To try and win back over the Catholics, the Lutheran leaders then became one of the first European cities to issue a declaration of religious toleration. Regrettably, the only ones who came to Münster were Anabaptists. The only group Catholics and Lutherans could agree were freaking bonkers. This group was led by the polygamist John of Leyden, who claimed that Münster was to be the second Jerusalem and that the Christians were to prepare the city, promptly kicking the Lutherans out and taking control of the city. Outside the walls, Catholics and Lutherans have made an agreement to siege and retake the city, and upon finding this out, John shut the walls. The problem was, the Lutherans also took all of the money and a good bit of the food in the city with them, and so they barely had to siege the city before. Story 3. It's not a very funny setting, but I love the Colditz Castle, Oflag IVC POW Camp, escape attempts of World War II, which include hiding in a tea chest, mostly funny because the escapee was so short, he was known as the medium-sized man, dressing up in drag, making and using the classic bedsheet rope, digging many tunnels, building an entire freaking glider behind an entire fake wall in an attic. A few prisoners also became ghosts, meaning they remained inside the castle but could not be found by the Germans. They began starving, and John opened the walls and begged the besiegers not to hurt his people, a request they did not grant him. Leyden, along with 2 of his cohorts, were ripped apart by white-hot tongs, with Leyden, for his polygamy, having his nether parts ripped off with the tongs before being disemboweled. After their deaths, the 3 were strung up in cages hanging from the Cathedral of Münster, and the cages are still freaking there today. Story 4. I may have posted this before, but Appian's history of early Rome was some pretty wild stuff. My favorite is from the Samnite History 7.2, page 79 of Loeb, concerning the embassy sent to Tarentum to demand that the prisoners who had been taken there be surrendered. The Tarentines made difficulties about admitting the embassy to their council at all, and when they had received them, jeered at them whenever they made a slip in their Greek, and made fun of their togas and the purple stripe upon them. But a certain Philonides, a fellow fond of jest and ribaldry, going up to Postumius, the chief of the embassy, turned his back to him, drew up his dress, and polluted him with his filth. The spectacle was received with laughter by the bystanders. Basically, Tarentum was a Greek settlement in Italy. They had taken some prisoners who were Roman allies. Rome sent an ambassador to demand their release, so some guy projectile diarrheaed on the ambassador. Naturally, it did not end well for the Tarentines. Story 5. Dr. James Barry was an incredible doctor who was known for being the hardest creature they had ever met by people like Florence Nightingale. At one point, the guy got his hot-headed butt into a pistol duel where he shot the hat off his opponent while taking a bullet to the leg. He immediately got to work pulling it out and patching himself out so that it impressed the officer he was dueling against, and they became close friends. He was the first British military/Irish person to perform a successful C-section where both the mother and child survived, long before anesthesia properly existed. After his death, it was revealed that he was born female but lived almost his entire life as a man. The British Army, so ashamed, sealed his records for over 100 years, as if that was going to prevent anyone from knowing that one of their best and most influential doctors of all time, who was a hardened bad butt, was female. Story 6. There's a lot of myth surrounding Minamoto no Takemoto. He is believed to be this ridiculous archer standing at 2 meters tall. After losing in a war to his older brother, he is exiled to an island. Well, the winners of the war realized, poop, we shouldn't just leave him there, he might come back for revenge one day. So they sent a small fleet after him. He supposedly took down an entire ship via bow and arrow, but there were too many people. So he retreated back to his place and waited for the men pursuing him. When they arrived, he stood up, cut open his belly, and started throwing his guts at them. This is also possibly the first record of seppuku. He is also the supposed father of the first king of Okinawa, which gave justification to the Japanese people for the control over Okinawa. Story 7. Okay. Number 1. Battle of Kerensebees, modern-day Romania. Austrian army is sent out during the Austro-Turkish War. A unit is split up to cover more ground or something. The two halves meet up again, and because of the different languages the soldiers spoke, and maybe a tad bit of drunkenness, the two units were confused and started firing at each other. Number 2. The 12 Battles of the Isonzo. Italian forces engaged in 12 separate battles with Austro-Hungarian forces during World War I around the Isonzo, Soca nowadays, river. Most of the fighting was in present-day Slovenia and Italy. The Italians won 5 times, the Austro-Hungarians thrice, 3 inconclusive, and in the end, the Austro-Hungarians won. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 8. Hear the story of St. Lawrence. He was the church's treasurer in the early days, 3rd century CE, back when Christians were still low on the food chain. When the Roman emperor had the pope beheaded and demanded the church's riches from Lawrence, he divided them among the faithful and then presented a group of poor, orphans, lepers, etc. to the emperor, proclaiming that these people were the Christians' true treasures. The Romans were not happy about that, so they had him tortured and then executed by roasting him on a grill. After he was lying on the grill on his back for some time, he allegedly said, "I'm quite well done on this side, you can flip me now." To this day, St. Lawrence is the patron saint of chefs and comedians alike. Story 9. War in the 6th century was usually a fairly brutal affair. When a city was captured, its people were often enslaved or killed. So when, during the Byzantine Sassanid Wars, Khosrow I of Persia successfully besieged Antioch, its inhabitants were understandably somewhat nervous. However, rather than enslaving them or killing them, Khosrow brought the city's population in its entirety back to Persia and rebuilt them an almost exact replica of Antioch, down to the layout of the city and rooms in the houses. The people were freed and made into full Persian citizens. The city was named Weh Antioch Khosrow, Khosrow's better Antioch, and he took great pride in ensuring that it saw greater prosperity than the Byzantine version. Story 10. I'm personally a huge fan of the story of the Siege of Tyre. Tyre was an ancient city, massively fortified, basically an impregnable island fortress. Now, impregnable isn't a word Alexander the Great is okay with. Confronted with the reality that, besieging an island fortress that has a powerful navy is a difficult, almost impossible endeavor, Alexander the amazingly persistent decided on the only reasonable course of action left to him: turn the island into a peninsula by building a huge land bridge. Too long didn't read, "You can't conquer an island fortress," said Tyre. "Then I'll make you not an island," said Alexander the more than adequate. Story 11. Diamond Jim Brady was one of the richest men in late 19th century America. He was famous for living large, throwing lavish parties, and as a big eater, when he threw a party at Delmonico's in New York, they saved the champagne corks. And he was never happier than when they were brought to him in a couple of laundry baskets. He was also a teetotaler. He never drank wine or liquor because he believed them to be bad for his health. Instead, he drank orange juice by the gallon. He died of kidney stones, which his doctor blamed on drinking too much orange juice. Story 12. More like darkly comedic and ridiculous, but here goes. Frederick Barbarossa drowned in hip-deep water. He was a Holy Roman Emperor and was committing a huge force, I think one of the biggest, to a crusade, and was on his way to the Holy Land when they had to cross a river. He took his horse in, and the water was so cold, so the horse threw him. This landed him in approximately hip-deep water, but since he was wearing armor, he couldn't get out, and he drowned. His whole force then went into a panic and either turned back or killed themselves. Pretty crazy stuff. Story 13. Not a historian, but my mom tells stories from living in Key West in the 80s. My favorite is the Conch Republic. Basically, coke was the main source of income for them at the time, and Florida cracked down on smuggling, searching cars, etc. In response, Key West withdrew from the U.S., called themselves the Conch Republic, declared war, fired one shot at the mainland, then surrendered and requested federal aid. I have absolutely no idea if it's true, but it used to make me cackle. Cops, what has so far been the creepiest call you've ever had to respond to, and what happens? Story 1. Got a report of a missing husband. He told his wife and family of 6 children that he was going to get his tires changed, but never returned. And this was 12 hours ago. They had purchased another house in a neighboring community, and the relationship with the wife was under pressure. So the wife assumed he was staying at the other house and claimed he would never end his own life. The strange thing about this report, though, was that he emptied his personal bank account into his wife's this morning as well. The wife explained this off, saying that they recently had a fight about finances, and he agreed that he was bad at money, and maybe they should just have a joint account that she controls. On a hunch, I asked his 14-year-old boy if there were any areas in the mountains nearby that his father enjoyed going to, and the son identified a road about 10 miles away. It was nearing midnight, but I decided to drive to the top of this old and abandoned Forest Service road. As I drove through the snow and started to climb the road, I felt a gut feeling that I would 100% find this guy up there, either thinking about or already acting out a seppuku. This snow-laid gravel road had some sign of travel, but no real indication of how fresh the vehicle tracks could be. As I reached the top of the road after an hour of travel, I was honestly surprised that I did not find his black truck. I spent the drive back down thinking about gut feelings and how they're unreliable, but that I somehow felt different about this one. As I traveled up the road, I did notice over a dozen smaller roads branching off, but they were not mapped, and I had already spent too much time on a single occurrence in a busy city with too few police officers. Nonetheless, I decided to check a single of these secondary roads, and about 3/4 of the way down, I picked a road at random to check, and sure enough, my headlights lit up the back end of a black truck about 100 yards past the first corner. Even if I hadn't memorized the license plate beforehand, I wouldn't have had to run it. It was clearly his. I radioed that I had found the truck, parked my vehicle, and traveled 20 feet to his truck with my heart beating like I was doing it at a sprint rather than a normal walk. What I found inside was a mess of brains and blood caused by a self-inflicted shotgun wound under the chin. I'll save you from the description. There was just something about that gut feeling while traveling this abandoned and quiet mountain road, followed by a sense of being tricked by the gut feeling, then finding out it was true by discovering such a gruesome scene, having to wait 3 hours next to his truck waiting for body removal, and then to end it all by having to go to the family who was expecting good news to deliver to them the worst news possible. That makes me feel creeped out to this day. Story 2. I'm interning with the Sheriff's Police Department, so most of my time is spent on patrol. We got called out to do a wellness check, which the deputy thought was going to be a piece of cake, like she was out of town or something. We get there and are met by the neighbors who told us that the mail is piling up in the mailbox and that there are several untouched packages on the porch. Okay, so we go up the house and the front door is unsecured. So we crack open the door a couple of inches and the deputy calls inside, but the door won't move anymore. The house was one of those split houses where the stairs meet at the front door and the upstairs and downstairs are offset, so we concluded that there might be stuff behind the door. It's about this time that the deputy tells me that she's a known hoarder, and that could be why the door was stuck. He also mentions that if we see flies on the inside of the windows, she's most likely inside and deceased. As we walk around the side of the house, we notice a lot of flies on the windows. The back door was locked, and as we looked in, we noticed bags and bags of garbage, diapers, and miscellaneous stuff all over the place. We head back to the front and attempt to make entry. He pushes the door open, this time with more force, and from underneath, I see a grease-like liquid spreading out from under the door. The deputy stops, closes the door, and calmly tells me that the lady was indeed deceased, and wedged behind the door. From the dates of the packages, we concluded that she had been gone for about 2 months. Once we did make entry into the house, I was allowed inside. After 2 months, she didn't even look like a human corpse. Her skin and body had sagged and melted to the floor, and her face was all black and had been eaten to the bone by maggots. I'll never forget the smell when the coroners moved her, and she popped. It was like a physical presence. Whatever those people get paid to deal with that stuff, it's not enough. The thing that really got to me, though, was wondering if she had fallen down the stairs and had her life end there, or if she fell and was unable to move and waited for help that would never come. Story 3. I responded to a report of an unresponsive infant. When I arrived, all the family members were standing around casually in the front yard pointing into the house. I found the baby in the back room, laying on her back on a bare mattress. I started CPR, but realized the baby was probably already deceased. We rushed her out to the arriving ambulance, hoping they had a way to bring her back. I learned she was the mother's second suspicious SIDS death, and I had her other children removed from her care. The difficult part was when I left the scene and went to the ER to see what came of the situation. As I walked in and asked where she was, an ER nurse walked over to me and handed me the deceased baby swaddled in a blanket and told me to wait for someone to show me to the morgue. So I'm standing there in the ER in uniform, holding what everyone thinks is a live infant. but rather an infant corpse, and several people stopped by wanting to see her and commenting on how cute it is to see an officer holding a baby. I just smiled, but it killed me inside. I was ushered back to the morgue after what felt like an eternity, and told I had to wait with the baby until the medical examiner arrived. They took the blankets off and laid her on a stainless steel gurney and left me alone with her again. I lounged around the morgue for about an hour, waiting. By the time I got home, several hours after the end of my shift, because this call came out 15 minutes before the end of my 10-hour shift, I laid down on my bed and cried for a long time. My young daughter was in daycare, and my wife was at work. I really needed to hold both of them, so the house felt incredibly empty. My daughter was only slightly older than the infant, and when I was looking at her earlier, I kept seeing my own daughter. I didn't get any sleep at all before going back in for the next shift later that night. Story 4. 911 dispatcher reporting in, received a call from an elderly lady who had trouble breathing. I had taken several calls from her and her husband in the past, so I recognized her voice. I dispatched an ambulance to her residence and held her on the line, trying to keep her calm while the ambulance was responding. Ambulance advises that they have a 15-minute ETA. She lived in a very rural part of West Virginia. I'm talking to her, asking about her husband and how he was doing, and just making small talk with her. The ambulance calls in and advises they are on scene, and I let them know that she's in severe respiratory distress, and I still had her on the line. I let her know the ambulance is coming to the door to go answer the door, and she says okay and hangs up the phone. Pretty normal, yeah? Well, here's where it gets weird. The EMT and paramedic on scene call back about a minute later and advise no one is answering the door. We have a sheriff unit who was in the area polling on the scene about that time. The sheriff unit confirmed the address and advised he is breaching the door to make access to the patient. 5 minutes go by, and the paramedic on scene radios in asking who the caller was. I advise it was the elderly female who lived at the residence. He tells me that he's going to call in and needs to speak with the supervisor on shift. We get him over to the supervisor, and the supervisor confirms the information that I gave him and asks what's going on. Apparently, the elderly female had been unalive for a while and was already in full rigor mortis. They thought I was wrong on the caller, but the other dispatchers played it back and confirmed that it was the female who called. The ambulance transferred to the hospital, and we got the same calls and disbelief from the doctors. So I took a call from a ghost. Story 5. Detention officer at a local jail here. We had a guy get brought in about 2 a.m. one night who we immediately knew was about to give us a fun time based on the way he was moving, quickly snapping the head back and forth, looking all over the room, etc. One of my coworkers and I stay with the booking officer to help her out when the stuff inevitably hits the fan. The guy keeps rambling on throughout the whole process. Parts of his speech are understandable, but most of it is gibberish. At one point, he looks up at my coworker and says, "Would you blame me for it?" Trying to keep the guy calm, my coworker tells him, "Nah, man, no one can blame you." For whatever reason, this set the guy off. He leaps off the bench, and we both push him back down. My coworker is trying to get handcuffs on his other wrist. He was already handcuffed by one hand to the bench, and I'm holding him against the wall with every bit of strength I have. This mother guy was strong. I swear the bench was about to come up off the concrete when he first leapt at us. Once my coworker gets handcuffs on him, we take a step back. The guy throws his head back, eyes rolled all the way back, and lets out an inhuman scream that I've only heard in movies about demon possession. He then moves his head as if he's looking around the room, but still with his eyes rolled into the back of his head, and spouts off more nonsense. I'm not Catholic, but I was very tempted to cross myself. The screaming, head throwing back, and eye rolling continue on for about 45 minutes. Every so often, he'd come back to reality and talk to us like a normal person for a moment, and then go back into crazy mode. Story 6. My dad worked in a precinct with one of the highest crime rates in New York City. I think it had the highest red rum rate during his years on the job. Anyway, he won't tell us stories about what he's seen because they're mostly horrific and still give him nightmares almost 15 years off the job. However, I do remember he told us one story when he was really drunk. A woman in her 20s walked into her apartment building late from work one night and was waiting for the elevator. It opened, and the only person in there was a creepy-looking guy. Though apprehensive, she got in and pressed her floor number, but noticed that the basement button was pressed. Normally, after 9 p.m., maintenance would lock the basement button to prevent random people from going down there and fricking with stuff. I guess someone forgot to lock it. The creepy guy ended up taking her down there, tying her up, and raping and torturing her for hours. He then took her apartment key, went up to the floor she'd pressed when she'd first gotten into the elevator, tried every door until he found hers, and took her roommate, also a woman in her 20s, into the basement where he continued torturing and raping both of them until dawn. Maintenance found them that morning, and my dad was a responder. Again, my dad never told us stories. This one might have stuck out because he has 4 daughters, but I think it's got to be up there in the creepy factor. Story 7. Went to a welfare check. A neighbor called in. He hadn't seen this guy for a few days, and the lights have been on for a while. I go and look around and find no footprints or tire marks in the snow. Recent storm. I checked the garage, and nothing. I checked the house, which was unlocked, and found the guy's cell phone, keys, wallet, and cash with the TV on. That's when I realized this was now an unalive body search. I looked everywhere, in and outside the house and around the garage. There were several old junk vehicles on the property, but again, no tire marks or shoe prints or anything. I called all the recent numbers on his phone, and no one's heard from him. Only so much I can do, so I issue a be on the lookout, and we start getting NCIC paperwork ready. Next day, the day shift officer goes over to follow up. Turns out the guy was plowing his driveway and either had a medical condition or something, and either passed out or had his life end on the spot and crashed the truck onto the other junk cars, which then caught on fire. Edit investigation leads to the fact that this happens a week before I got this call, leaving only a pile of bones in the front seat covered in snow. I felt awful for not finding him that night, but it was really creepy knowing his remains were inches away from where I was searching. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 8. Military police officer, so I worked both law enforcement and corrections for a bit. In corrections, the main office was also the police services desk. Often it would ring and no one would be on the other end. Anyways, one time it rang and instead of a number, it had a descriptor that I don't remember exactly. Something like emergency phone 11. I was new and immediately called my superiors about it. They told me to drop it and never report anything like that again. Ominous, right? Anyways, the reason I told that is to tell this. Sometime later, on patrol, I got dispatched to essentially an abandoned side of the base to respond to an emergency phone call. No location at first, because radio didn't know where emergency phone 11 was and was new to the base, so he didn't get the same memo to not report those calls. Radio then went on to say that the caller had sounded frantic and thought they were being chased, meaning that someone had actually been on the other end. Radio eventually digs up some old maps that label an emergency radio 11 location and relays them to me and my partner, so we drive there in a hurry. There is no phone, just a broken pole where one had once been. That was a fun one to report. Story 9. Not me, but my firefighter/EMT father. Standard car accident, calls on a busy highway in the area, I-75 if you're curious. Dad goes up to the car, things trashed, teenage driver, around 20, head partially cut in half, eyeballs hanging out, clearly unalive on arrival. Now my dad had seen some stuff, for example, a grandma accidentally backing over her 3-year-old granddaughter, so this disturbed him, but he was numb to it. However, it hit home when he got off shift, literally hit home. Turns out the kid was the son of our next-door neighbor. We barely knew the guy, who came over and asked if my dad had been on the call, and then proceeded to break into tears on our front porch. He asked my dad if there was evidence of him suffering or not, to which my dad said no. It was true, but he would have said that regardless. After consoling him, he went back to his house. We still keep up with him now, especially on the anniversary of the incident, when he apparently gets kind of depressed, according to the relatives we also talk to. Story 10. Not a cop, but answering 911 lines. Had an opening line of a guy yelping, "Ow!" in between thud noises. He didn't respond to anything I said. Turns out those thuds were the sounds of him chopping off his fingers with a meat cleaver. Had a Good Samaritan call about a guy pulled up in front of a medical center in his car. He had a travel blender plugged into his vehicle, and he was bleeding heavily. He had chopped his dong off and put it in the blender. I forget the specifics as to why, but it had something to do with a pending molestation charge or grape case. Last but not least, the one that will stick with me is the woman who called at around 8 in the morning on a Sunday, telling me in an eerily calm voice that she had ended the life of her baby by bashing his head into the floor because the devil was inside him. I didn't believe her. It was true. Edit. I didn't believe her as in I didn't think she really harmed her children. Story 11. Man, this was probably 2010, 2011. I was really new. Call came in as an unknown problem. Basically, the 911 was so effed up, even dispatch didn't know what to call it. Turns out this guy had just red-rummed his stepfather and then walked to his grandparents' house to end their lives as well. He stabbed his grandmother through the eye with a Rambo-style Bowie knife, one that had the compass in the pommel of the handle. He missed her brain by about 1/8 of an inch, so she survived. Instead, she came running out of the house when we got there, knife sticking out of her freaking eye, and the compass was spinning around because she was moving. My brain literally went, "That's not real," and I went past her, along with several other cops, before the sergeant was like, "What in the actual F are you guys doing?" She survived. We caught the guy with a stroke of pure luck. Elderly woman with a massive hunting knife for an eye, definitely the creepiest thing I can remember seeing. Story 12. I'm not a cop, but my dad just recently shared these stories with me. My grandfather was a cop in a small town in the 60s to 70s. Late at night, it was common for officers to pull over vehicles driving through town, especially if they didn't recognize them. He pulls over a bus load of people. He walks through and asks them where they're headed, yada yada. They were headed to California. It was Charles Manson and his group. Another story, same grandfather, same stop a car passing through protocol, asked the driver where he was headed, BS'd for a while and told the guy to have a nice evening. Few towns over, a guy gets pulled over again, shoots and ends the life of the cop. Apparently, he was doing this as he drove along, got pulled over, and shot the cop. When they questioned him, he said he had been pulled over by my grandfather, but he was such a nice guy, he didn't end his life. But he did have the gun sitting in his lap. Story 13. Ex-cop, I worked in a high-tech task force agency conducting computer forensics investigations. Lots of child porn. Lots. Anyways, we were doing a multi-agency search warrant sweep in a large metro area in California. We serve a search warrant for distributing/possessing CP at a residence in a semi-decent area, and the suspect fits the prototypical Hollywood child molester look. He lived with his disabled wife, no kids, and she had mobility issues. Mostly stayed downstairs and had not been upstairs for years. We go upstairs, and this guy has a legitimate station set up in one of the bedrooms that had an outside padlock on it. It was dark, the windows were covered, and he had baby dolls with their buttholes cut out all over the room, and some of their mouths cut out for impromptu baby dolls. Some of the heads were removed and scattered on the floor. This guy had serious issues. Story 14. My department sends an officer to all rescue calls if one is available. We got a call late one night to assist rescue at a townhouse complex for a woman hemorrhaging. We didn't show up until rescue had already left with the patient, so we let ourselves into the residence and eventually found the bathroom, which was covered in blood. Blood on the walls, all over the toilet, everywhere. Crazy amount of blood. Rescue hadn't mentioned anything suspicious on the radio, so this was surprising. We were preparing to leave when one of the younger officers noticed bloody footprints leading to the front door, and then across the parking lot to a dumpster. We gathered at the dumpster, lifted up the top, and lit up the interior with our flashlights. Same officer extended his baton, reached into the dumpster with it, and brought out a bloody plastic grocery bag with a baby in it. True story. Story 15. One night at about 11:30, this guy jumps off a bridge into a bay. On the way down, he hits a guardrail and loses both forearms and the top of his head. One set of officers found his arms and set them aside. I was on the dive team, so we went to collect his remains. While we check on his condition, we noticed the brain is missing. This was me flipping up his scalp and taking a peek inside to find nothing there. It's very strange to look for something very important and not find it. Anyway, we bag him up and get him on the boat. Our supervisor tells us that we have to at least look for his brains. Gross. So we dive and look around, but the only thing we find is a piece of skull. And we had decided if we did find it, none of us wanted to grab it. Story 16. From a post I made a few weeks ago, I was called out to negotiate with a 17-year-old female who had barricaded herself in a bathroom with multiple knives and scissors. She'd done it right, too. SWAT ended up going through the sheetrock wall. She wouldn't talk with me at all, but had multiple graphic conversations with her mother, who committed seppuku 3 years earlier, and her dad, who's serving lots of years in prison for sensually abusing her. When SWAT pulled her out, she had completed multiple circumcisions on herself with the scissors, completely cut her nipples off, and had sodomized herself multiple times with multiple steak knives. The kicker was she was talking the whole time, and her tone or volume never changed. The pain never bothered her, or more likely, she never felt it. The human mind is scary as frick. Story 17. 2 adults reported missing, parents of 2 adult children, 1 male, 1 female. Alerts are in place for the missing people's credit cards. The father's credit card hits on a purchase at a jewelry store where an engagement ring was purchased. It leads us to the son who made the purchase of the ring. Son is questioned and confessed to ending the lives of both parents and burying them in shallow graves. The son led us to the gravesite and we began the process of recovery. Both mom and dad had black garbage bags over their heads, being held in place by duct tape around their necks. The sight of the bodies, especially their faces once the bags were removed, and the smell is something I'll never forget. Story 18. I stopped a 25-year-old Asian male from entering the east executive entrance of the White House. He had slit his wrists and neck prior to his arrival, but not deep enough to hit major blood vessels. He told me that he was a secret agent working for J. Edgar Hoover and that he was 60 years old. He said he had important information to pass to President Obama. I ended up having to detain him, stop the bleeding, and then involuntarily commit him. Turned out to be a local college kid going through some mental health issues. I've interviewed hundreds of White House callers, but this kid took the cake. Story 19. My cousin is a cop, and he responded to a call on Valentine's Day night. A 12-year-old girl called in to say her mother had blown her brains out in the living room. I guess her and her brother were getting ready for dinner, and the mom just shot herself. He said the creepy thing about it was dinner all set up, drinks on the table, and suddenly she shot herself. Kids were sitting outside when he arrived. To this day, I can't imagine Valentine's Day for them, but I know that is something that stuck with him seeing that. Story 20. It was a stormy night on the Oregon coast. A lady was driving drunk and ran into the back of a parked school bus. When she did, her car caught on fire, but she was able to escape. When I found her slowly walking down a side street, I was telling her to stop and turn around. When she turned around, her lower jaw was gone, and she was totally dazed. Her tongue was sticking straight out the top of her neck, and she was trying to talk. She ended up surviving, but needed tons of plastic surgery. Staff of hostels all around the world, what is the weirdest crap you've ever seen happening amongst backpackers? Story 1. This is going to be a bit weird if people didn't figure that out before coming into this thread. I've never worked in one, but stayed in them as I backpacked around South America. In Peru, after returning from a hiking trip with some new friends, we went to a local club and started having a great time. No inhibitions because nobody knew each other, so nobody was embarrassed to dance or whatever. I was pretty reserved as a kid, so this was a whole different side of me that I could let out with zero repercussions. This local girl was staring at me from across the dance floor, so I went over and gestured to her, asking her to dance. I spoke no Spanish, and her no English. We ended up dancing and drinking all night and having a really good time. As the night wound down, we stumbled back to my hostel, and I brought her into the large 8-bedroom dorm that I had rented, which was currently only occupied by me. We started making out and fooling around pretty quickly, and found ourselves naked on my bed. I was a virgin at the time, so I was pretty excited that this exotic Peruvian woman was going to bang me. I wanted to be cautious and not finish immediately, so I focused heavily on her, trying whatever I could do to please her before I got on with myself. and ended up going down on her as she laid across my bed. So there I was, butt naked, crouched on the bed with my head in her crotch and my extremely white butt in the air pointing towards the door, when the manager of the hostel walked in, leading a group of newly arrived backpackers that were planning on staying in the dorm I was occupying. This manager woman immediately started losing her crap, shouting at us, in Spanish mind you, so I have literally no idea what she was saying, and making a big shooing motion with her hands, as if she would fan us out into the street and purge the room of the evil deed that had been done. The new backpackers were just standing in the doorway looking in with no clue what to do. The only thing that I could do was make the same overly broad shooting motion towards this woman while shouting back in English. They eventually left and apparently found another room to occupy. We continued, had our night together, and my girl left in the morning. Check out the next morning would have been awkward if I hadn't still been in the mindset of not giving a frick what people thought. She lectured me, I think, during the entire procedure and charged me double for having 2 people in the room. I can't be the only one expecting the girl to be the manager's daughter. Story 2. I'm not a manager of a hostel, just a traveler, but I have a few stories. I was in Kiev, Ukraine during Christmas and New Year's, and the hostel I was staying in was super informal and pretty much just an apartment with a lot of rooms that some guy put bunk beds in and rented out. The managers were partying every night, so it had that kind of frick it, get drunk atmosphere. New Year's Eve rolls around, and everyone is going out together for a pub crawl in the general direction of Independence Square. It doesn't go well. Nobody ends up leaving the very first bar in time for the New Year's countdown, except me and one other American guy. We drunkenly sprinted to Independence Square to be there before midnight, and made it by literally 5 seconds. That's the last we see of the group that night. When we came back in the morning, 3 people were missing, and pretty much everyone else ended up puking or crapping themselves. One of the 3 missing people walks in. He's missing his front teeth. They're just gone. He's still too drunk to explain, so he goes to bed. When he wakes up, he doesn't even want to tell us what happened. When he finally does, we find out he paired off with this moderately attractive Dutch girl, and they were heading back to the hostel to ring in the new year when she drunkenly tripped walking down some icy stairs to pass under the roads. I don't know why, but they use these underground passages instead of crosswalks in Kiev, and she grabbed this dude and took him with her. He, having not slipped and being drunk, didn't realize what she did until he's headbutting the steps with his face, thus completely chopping off his front teeth at the root. He ended up having to stay in Kiev longer than expected to get new teeth put in. Moral of the story, as much as getting crap-faced in Ukraine in the winter seems like an awesome idea, think twice and avoid stairs. Story 3. Last summer, this British guy came into the hostel, around 40-ish, acting a bit weird, asking people straight up about drugs and crap. He sits in the common area, muttering to himself, and across the table says to me that he ended the life of his friend and that the cops are looking for him, or some crap like that. Me and my friends ignore him and go out partying later that night, come back early in the morning, and keep partying in the little outside area they've got. We're all still up and merry around 7 in the morning when this girl comes out to us crying, her face completely white, saying that she's been lying in bed, not able to sleep, and scared beyond her wits since midnight. Apparently, she shared a dorm with this guy, and they were the only ones occupying it, and the dude has his bed close to the door, so she would have to pass him if she wanted out. She said she went to bed early and was about to sleep when this dude came in and laid on his bed and started mumbling and ranting about some freaky crap, like he had this whole relationship going on with her, that he wanted her to come over to his bed and just cuddle, and then when she didn't, he was all like, "Why don't you love me anymore?" And then he imagined that they had gotten back together and just schizoid crap. This had gone on for over 8 hours, and she was so terrified, so didn't dare to move. We went up to him and tried to get him to leave, but he claimed that he couldn't move, that he had been paralyzed by some disease, and that we were all lying about this and that, and eventually the police were called and they removed him. It turned out he had a fake passport on him. Really weird crap. Story 4. Staying in a hostel in Wellington, I was woken up by a woman and a man screaming at the top of their voices. She had awoken to find this guy lying on top of her and screamed the place down, and he started yelling a split second later. When all the lights came on and everyone calmed down, we found that he had been on the top bunk and it had partially collapsed on one side, tipping him off onto her bed. She woke eyeball to eyeball with him and just let rip. while he was just trying to figure out what had happened and where he was when this woman started screaming right in his face. Poor guy. I've stayed in hostels lots over the past 6 or so years, and among many, this was simple but my favorite. In a 10-bed dorm in Coogee Beach, Sydney, all the guys we went out together got drunk and stumbled back and got into bed. We all chatted crap for a bit, then people started to drift off. Some guy had met a girl at the bar and arrived later with her. They thought they were quiet, but I was sure they were being so loud everyone was woken up too. Either way, I tried to ignore it while they made quick, loud, and noisy bottom bunk hostel whoopee. Once they were done, the room was silent. I still wasn't sure if anyone else had been woken up by them, till one of the guys, a scouter, simply said out loud to break the silence, "Can I have a go next?" The poor girl ran out. Everyone was awake, and a good hour of laughing ensued. Hostels are great. You definitely see the worst and best in people. Story 5. I don't work at a hostel, but alas, my friend and I experienced this while staying at one. So, my friend and I traveled to Copenhagen in 2009 to see a concert, Metallica if you're wondering, and stayed at a hostel in downtown Copenhagen. So anyway, we were out partying late and get pretty drunk. The morning after, we wake up hungover as heck. My friend is a bit quicker out of the bed than me, and he proceeds to the common showers/changing room. When he gets to the door to the changing room, he opens it, and standing there is a pale, fat man, about 30 years old, completely naked in front of the mirror with one hand on his hip and the other one jerking furiously. My friend saying he has never thought one could spank the monkey that hard without breaking it. Note, this is about 10 to 11 a.m., so he was clearly into risky playing of the old skin flute. My friend then just stares at him for a few seconds because of slow reactions due to a hangover, laughs, then walks away. As my friend is walking away from the changing rooms, he hears the guy saying, "Sorry," in a really shameful voice. Later on that evening, my friend sees Mr. Wank sitting with his friends having some beers and laughing until he sees my friend staring at him and smiling. "I know what you did this morning, you dirty dog," smile. Mr. W then proceeds to stop laughing, looks down, and says nothing for the remainder of the time we sit near them. Poor mustard. Too long didn't read. My friend walked in on a guy wanking furiously in front of a mirror in the common changing rooms midday. That's the stuff. Story 6. Traveler story, not a hostel employee. A few years back, traveling through Europe, I met with a bunch of Paris locals on Xmas Eve in the bar of my hostel. Long story short, I end up having incredibly drunken whoopee time with a French girl on the floor in the middle of a 6-bunk room, totally occupied by Taiwanese and Indian students. I vaguely recall looking up and seeing all 5 other bunks with their sheets pulled up over their faces. Cut to a month later, I've done a lap of France and have one night booked in the same Paris hostel before I head off to Asia. I approached the hostel staff that I had befriended, offering cheese I had bought in Marseille. One guy said, "You're the one we had complaints about." Confused, I asked what they mean. He said, "On Christmas Day, all the Taiwanese students and Indian students complained that someone was doing a corn video in the middle of their hotel room. They also said they knew when it stopped because you climbed into bed and started snoring." We laughed a lot, and they gave me free beer because they got lots of hits on their website. I had a roommate in a hostel bring a girl back in the middle of the night. When they got too loud for me, I just got up and watched them from about 5 feet away. That worked better to put a stop to it than anything I could have said. Story 7. I was in Prague a few years ago, staying at a hostel, as high schoolers are wont to do. Me and my buddy had just gotten back from a night of drinking, poor decisions, etc., and were chilling in the lobby area when this Swedish metal band that was also staying at the hostel comes back, all of them absolutely poop-faced. The vocalist, who's this huge dude with long blonde hair, exactly what you'd expect from a Swedish metal band, is completely plastered, and starts yelling, asking people to kick him in the head. Nobody really wants to do it, but he was being really aggressive, and eventually he puts his head down on this table, and one of the other dudes in the band, I think the bassist, starts kicking him in the head, as requested. Like hard freaking kicks, right in the skull. After each kick, the dude yells to do it again. After 3 or 4 kicks, the bassist stops because his foot hurts too much, and they all go upstairs and pass out. I saw them all the next day, and the vocalist was completely fine, with no ill effects other than being hungover. The bassist, however, broke his freaking foot on this dude's hard butt heads and had to go to the hospital. Too long didn't read. Swedish metal band at a hostel in Prague engage in some drunken masochistic behavior. Hilarity ensues. This gives new meaning to the word metalhead. Story 8. A few years back, I stayed as a backpacker in Vienna, Austria for a few nights. Last night, I had a new bunkmate, and she seemed like a lovely girl. So I go out, get blackout drunk, and awake at 5 a.m. in my top bunk to the unmistakable sound of people doing it in the shower. A few minutes later, the girl brought her friend out and hopped into the bed under me. Several "come inside me" and "your dong is huge" ensue, and as I'm violently bounced around on the top bunk, feeling sicker by the minute. My bunkmate then calls out another man's name and is soon joined by a second young buck, and the party below me becomes a threesome. This continues for another 20 minutes while I am bounced around the loose bunk some more. Eventually they finish up and the guys leave, giving me the chance to escape to the bathroom and spew. When I return, the girl says to me casually, "Don't suppose you'd want a ride too?" or something to that effect. I politely decline and proceed to return to the bathroom and fall asleep in the shower. Too long didn't read. Chick in bed below me rides the tricycle as I awkwardly ponder my escape. Should have given her a ride, bud. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 9. Worked in a party hostel in the middle of Melbourne for a couple years. I've seen some crap, man. Our hostel had 3 bars in the building, one of which was open 24/7. Happy to elaborate, but in short, I've seen the following. A gorgeous Swedish girl in nothing but a G-string stroll into reception and ask for another key for her room. A Scottish guy on ecstasy run half a marathon. An off-duty army guy drops his pants, sits on a futon, and proceeds to crap on the futon and pee all over himself. An otherwise quiet and reserved Korean girl getting fisted in the middle of a bar. A 40-something divorced mother of 3 in the middle of a 6-guy sandwich. Multiple corn-style scenes in full dorm rooms, and a lot of other crap I can't remember. It was a crazy couple of years, and even now I look back and think, wow, did that crap really happen? Oh, forgot my favorite one. A German dude comes to reception and very calmly explains that a homeless man is in the stairwell abusing guests as they walk up and down. I went to investigate, and it was the manager of one of our bars. Story 10. I've never worked in a hostel, but I've stayed in loads. I always remember this one guy in Warsaw. It was quite a big hostel, but despite it being summer, quite empty. So I was in a room of 8 beds, and it was me, this guy, and a couple. On the first day, I walked in the room to find him grappling the ceiling as if he was Spider-Man. I didn't notice him at first, but then he thudded to the ground and acted as if nothing had happened. He repeated this trick a few times, and I saw him walking around the hostel as if he was a kid trying not to touch the floor, clambering on stuff and the walls, etc. When I woke up the next day, he was outside in the courtyard doing a cross between martial arts and some kind of yoga wearing a toga. When I got back that night, he was singing on Skype. I also noticed he was reading a book purely about squirrels. I was there for 3 nights, and I think he spent his whole time in the hostel doing crackpot things. He's just your regular Polish man. Source: I'm Polish. Story 11. I was working for accommodation in a hostel in Australia. This strange family stayed for a few nights. Really fat woman and nice, but clearly crazy Kiwi guy. He showed us cuts on his arms, legs, and torso that he had given himself, so that in a fight, if someone pulls a knife, I won't panic or react. Anyway, on their second night, they all got very drunk and have a huge argument. We hear a smash and head through to the lounge. The woman has smashed a table and chairs and is now semi-consciously peeing herself on the floor. So a few of our female friends, who are staying in the same dorm as her, wake her and try to get her to bed. But wait, there's more. The next morning, the girls tell us how the woman was up all night talking. It turns out that the argument had been with the Kiwi guy, who was her nephew, and also her lover. Too long didn't read. Fat woman pees herself after a fight with her nephew/lover. Tell the Kiwi guy that not reacting is not a good reaction to getting a knife pulled on you in a fight. Story 12. I worked at a party hostel in Budapest. In my time there, the card game Poophead became very popular, and eventually people raised the stakes of the game. A stake would be decided at the beginning of the game, i.e., loser has a shot of the winner's urine, and whoever decided to play committed to suffering if they lose. Initially, the stakes were relatively tolerable. Loser gets a piercing in a place of the winner's choice. Loser shaves off an eyebrow. Loser gets winner's initials tattooed on their bum, etc. In my time observing, I was never game to play. I witnessed a guy, the winner, vomiting on the loser's head. The same guy lost the following 2 days and had to lick the winner's bum and snort the winner's semen out of a shot glass. The same guy won for both those games. It didn't seem so fricked up at the time, but in hindsight, it was a very strange way for young travelers to be spending their days. Story 13. Not staff, but a hostel attendee. In Prague, we stayed in a hostel with a bar that liked to serve absinthe and Red Bull shots. Think Jaeger bombs. One guy, who we'll call Bluto, liked Animal House. Decided he'd go for the record of most A-bombs in one night. Something like 16. I'm fairly sure he made up this record. We all went to bed on the 3rd floor and figured the night was over. I woke up later from a dream of someone screaming, which turned out to be real. The lights were on and the whole dorm was awake, thanks to A-bomb guy lying on the ground with blood pouring from his head going, "Get fricked!" He fell from the top bunk. They heard him in reception on the bottom floor. Somehow I slept through it. He also wet the bed and did it in the hallway and spent the rest of the night screaming, "Get fricked!" at his brother. Story 14. Not hostel staff, but lived in a big hostel in central London when at university. Had a lot of fun there and saw the weirdest things during the time I was living there. By far the strangest of all is related to this girl who was very introverted and lonely, didn't really talk to anybody in there, and had the weirdest behavior. One day there was a commotion in one of the floors because she was all covered in blood and weak, walking like a zombie along the hallways, near the toilets and shower rooms. To make a long story short, she had just given birth to a baby in one of the shower rooms and nervously kept telling everyone that the baby wasn't hers. In came the police, as in other occasions, and social services, and that was the last we saw of her. Dude. Story 15. I was the new guy at the time, so I got stuck cleaning the bathrooms. Upon entering the men's room to do my rounds, I hear a man having what sounds like the most painful crap of his life. I carry on and go about my work for the next 15 minutes, and he still isn't out yet. Right as I'm about to ask him if he's all right, this big jolly Brit walks out of the stall with a handful of condoms filled with mystery drugs. He looks me dead in the eye, says, "Singapore, mate," and walks out solemnly shaking his head. In Singapore, if you get caught with drugs, you can face the death penalty. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.